Welcome back, everybody. It is time for our 3 p.m. presentation on female esports fans, trans parasocial relationships, and community dynamics. Our presenter for today is Sofia Anerousis from Boston University. Sophia, you are on.
Hi everyone, thank you so much. I'm Sophia, and I'm a master's student at Boston University in the Emerging Media Studies department. But this research project was a part of my undergraduate thesis, which I defended in May at CU Boulder. All right, so let's just go ahead and dive in and do a little bit of overview kind of on the topic. So, female esports fans are a small but growing demographic of the esports community. And so, while we have a bunch of existing research on esports itself, there's very little research that focuses specifically on the experience of the female esports fans. And so, here are my research questions. First, how do female esports fans perceive their relationships with esports players? How do female esports fans perceive their relationships with other esports fans? And how do female esports fans describe their experiences as members of the community? And just for a little bit of background, so fangirls, the concept of the fangirl can be traced as far back as the 1800s, and this is usually a term that's used negatively to kind of deride or dismiss women's interests as childish or immature. And parasocial relationships, so this is kind of defined as media viewers forming imagined intimacy relationships with media persons as if they were real interpersonal relationships. And so the concept of the transparasocial relationship furthers this by with the added factor of the fact that we can now directly interact with celebrities and idols on social media. Um, and so why is this important? So even though female esports fans are smaller or a smaller portion of the community, they're an important cornerstone. And so understanding the difficulties that they face and the ways that they maybe alienated us will help us better understand how to engage them as a demographic. The gaming industry as a whole is largely catered and advertised to men, but we obviously want it to be more of an inclusive space. So I'm just going to go over some of the key literature here. Um, First on fangirls, so they're kind of one of the most dominant symbols of fan culture, but they're not accepted. Their behavior is deemed as hyper feminine, therefore overly emotional and attached. And so many female fans will often try to distance themselves from the stereotype so as to not receive backlash or criticism. And then gaming and sexism. So due to men constantly being represented, it's harder for women to connect to their identity of being a gamer. And so women who enter these spaces are usually marginalized and labeled as not real gamers. And geek men feel the need to protect their space for homosocial male bonding and validate gaming as a masculine hobby. Esports engagement. So, through self-determination theory, we know that relatedness or the desire to feel loved and connected with others is the biggest need for esports fans. So, people tend to watch esports because of the camaraderie built between viewers and streamers slash players and a sense of belongingness built amongst esports fans. And so, from the limited existing research that we do have on female esports fans, which these two studies that I found were based on Chinese and Taiwanese female esports fans, so still not really reflective of Western female esports fans. But we know that they're more active in consuming endorsed products. Female esports fans tend to be more engaged in the community than their male counterparts, more willing to attend in-person events. Um, and despite growing populations of female esports fans, gender discrimination can be a barrier. Um, and also, male fans tend to be more concerned with performance, while female fans care more about players' well-being and kind of the player as a person. And also, female fans are more willing to contribute financially. And then onto the method. So for this project, I use in-depth interviews so we can best study lived experience. And so these were hour-long interviews conducted over Zoom, and I interviewed League of Legends and Overwatch esports fans to kind of incorporate the differences that could be caused by audience community si or community size, because League of Legends is a really big um, community, while Overwatch, at least in its current state, is a lot smaller. So let's move on to our findings. So I identified 7 different themes, and these themes are interest in esports, player and or team interest in relationships, content, the K-popification of esports, community, stereotypes and sexism, and representation in esports. So, interest in esports. So many participants cited their friends as the initial factor for getting them into esports, and also a lack of interest in traditional sports. Most participants either actively played the game or have played the game before. But 2 participants who were from the League of Legends side have never played their respective games. Um, and it was also noted that understanding of the gameplay was important to interest. So the 2 participants who did not play their games made an extra effort to go and learn the way that the game works. Um, and participants also noted for those who are interested in Overwatch League that it has a more kind of diverse fan base as compared to other games, so that was somewhat of an attractive factor for them. So participants who said was kind of talking about how Overwatch is an inclusive game and community. There's more women and queer people, and they kind of mentioned how it's easier to follow along with something that you identify with, in a game that has canonically gay characters. And they kind of compared it to the Valorant Pro scene, which they feel is a lot more blatantly misogynistic, as well as just like casual games and the community in general, so they found it harder to enjoy the esport. And then player and team interest in relationships. So for Overwatch League, due to the fact that Overwatch League had regional teams, many participants followed teams that represented their home city and state. Um, Branding and merch was an important factor for initial attraction to teams. A lot of participants mentioned color scheme and logos, and they also said that if they didn't like a team's color or branding, they wouldn't buy merch or support that team. Um, some fans mentioned that they feel more inclined to follow players over a specific team because of roster changes that happen after every season. And also personality was a very important factor when choosing a favorite player. It tended to be kind of a make or break thing for people where, um, you know, they felt like if the player had a bad personality or would say something sexist, racist, etc., that would completely turn them off from them. Um, Entertainment dynamics, competitiveness, as well as storylines were also mentioned. And also in terms of relationships to players, many participants mentioned that they actively try not to kind of exceed the boundaries of what is considered an appropriate fan-player relationship. So, participant form mentioned that she's had the same favorite player for years. And she mentioned because she likes the ones who don't open their mouth or just don't say, or players that are less likely to say something stupid. And she kind of mentions him as a safe option to have as a favorite player. And then participant 11 mentioned she felt like the teams were not necessarily religious figures, but figures that were kind of unrelated to her day-to-day life. And she could invest feeling in them without it feeling like it actually mattered. So, if they won or lost, it didn't affect her daily life, but it was still somewhat personal to her and but also something she could walk away from. Content. So content was also, I think, very important for sustained interest in esports. So many participants mentioned that out-of-game content such as vlogs and YouTube videos were important to them. And participants mentioned that fan-generated content is also important for keeping an esport fandom alive. So participant 6 kind of mentions after a while she got more into the non-game content, and that's what kind of kept her hooked as opposed to the actual games. And she still watches the games, but she's more invested in the things that go on outside of the game. And then participant 11 was kind of talking about dead internet theory and how kind of the publisher controls the game. The publisher broadcasts the game. Um, and so it's really important to have fan generated content, because if not, then the only people you have generated content are people who have vested interest in the financial success of the esport. And then the K-popification of esports. So this has been kind of a recently debated topic and trend. And so it's mostly brought about by female fans who were or still are K-pop fans. And so this is kind of highly debated because of the controversial nature of K-pop fandoms and the way that they work. Just due to, you know, a lot of parasocial relationships and kind of like the commodification of idols. And so among participants, there were kind of mixed feelings about K-pop, the K-popification of esports, but many agreed that it is beneficial in bringing in more female fans into esports. And so participant 3 kind of mentions that a lot of people talk about talk about the K-popification of esports because it's becoming more or because there's a lot more female fans that are becoming visible in these online spaces, and so they'll tend to hide their misogyny behind accusations of parasocialism. And then participant 10 had more of a negative disposition towards the K-popification of esports. They said they kind of had mixed feelings about K-pop culture and because it's very toxic. And people will see idols as commodities and not as people, and they're not treated like people. But they did mention that the one positive is that there's more female fans, and esports teams are more considerate of a feminine demographic. Community was a major factor in participants' prolonged interest in esports. So only 2 participants noted a mostly negative experience. But a lot of participants mentioned that this positive experience is due to the fact that they choose to surround themselves with very specific people. And they also noted that the in-person events are much more welcoming and friendly than just being in the online community. So participant 4 had a very negative experience. She said the esports community was the worst community she's ever been a part of. And she said she's been a part of a lot of atrocious fandoms. Um, and she said kind of more when she was deep into the community, everyone was very casually misogynistic. And then participant 10 mentioned, for the most part, it has been a welcoming experience, but a lot of that is because of the people she chooses to interact with and surround herself with. So she doesn't necessarily think that's the norm, and she also contributed. Part of that was attributed to the fact that most of her love for esports is within a community setting because she lives very close to a lot of the in-person events. And then stereotypes and sexism. So nearly all participants agreed that female esports fans are stereotyped in some way, and a lot of these stereotypes have to do with being parasocial or wanting to have inappropriate or sexual relationships with players. Um, Most participants said they have not been victims of harassment, but this had mostly to do with the fact that they took extra precautions, such as keeping their account private or going out of their way to actively avoid contributing to these stereotypes. And so participant 3 kind of mentioned how she doesn't really portray herself in a feminine way online. Um, because since she was growing up, she kind of was raised with men, and that's how she kind of portrays herself online. So she doesn't get a lot of the flack that's associated with being a female esports fan. And then representation in esports. So many participants complained about the lack of representation at the tier 1 level. The majority of participants called for more funding for all female leads, such as calling all heroes for Overwatch and game changers for League of Legends. So participant 9 was kind of complaining about there's no top level championship caliber female players, and there's a lot of reasons for that, like psychoanalytical, lack of coaching, lack of will of the community to integrate them. And she kind of said, while it's progressed in the past 10 years, it's not progressed very far. It still feels like in many ways we're stuck in the mid 2010s where, you're not good at this game because you're a girl. So, in spite of all of that advancement, it feels very artificial. It doesn't feel like women are making gains themselves. It feels like we have to ask nicely for favors to be included on people's teams, or we have to ask nicely to have women-only tournaments. And then participant 5 said women are so discouraged from being in the gaming field that you don't see female esports players. And they're there, but they never go up to the tier 1 level. And she mentioned how that feels a lot less relatable to her. And then I kind of asked all of my participants, what do you think can be done to kind of alleviate the negative experiences that female esports fans may face in their communities, whether that be from female esports fans themselves or from teams and players in like organizations. And so there's a lot of different ideas for solutions. So some believe that female fans should try to combat stereotypes by actively not conforming to them. Um, some participants mentioned that teams should collaborate with fans on projects more, because there's a lot of kind of female fan-led projects recently, like photo card projects, or I've seen a lot of barista projects as well. More in-person events to make it kind of safer for female fans. They also mentioned wanting to see more female streamers partnered with teams. And also teams taking more of a stance against misogyny when it happens in the community. And that's all I have. Thank you. Feel free to contact me um, in any of uh, the platforms.
Sophia, there are a couple of questions for you. Well, there's a couple of very interesting and lovely presentations. But then a question for you from Dr. Seth Jenny is K-popification. What does that exactly mean to you? What does that fandom look like? And what kinds of esports game titles do they tend to consume?
Yeah, so the kind of K-popification means I guess just like bringing certain fandom practices over to esports. So I think a lot of this would be like photo cards, which I've noticed a lot recently. And I've also noticed some League of Legends teams starting they'll do like similar events to what K-pop groups will do, like fan signs where you get to meet the players, and also they have like messaging subscription apps. So in K-pop, groups tend to have these like message subscriptions where you can kind of message the idol, or like they send messages and you receive them and then you can message back and they may or may not respond to you.
And now, one of the things that I did notice in the solutions you talked about, some of them really put the onus of solving the problem on the people who are kind of being victimized by these stereotypes. So, what kind of solutions do you see as more implementable or more sustainable in the future?
Yeah, I think there is definitely some people thought that, female is like just keep doing what you're doing until it's becomes normal, and some people are like, don't do that. Um, I think at the end of the day, I think it's better to just keep doing what you're doing. I don't think anyone should have to I guess like restrict themselves as long as it doesn't reach a point of, things becoming inappropriate, which I rarely think it does. I think the kind of backlash against parasocial behavior is it's very exaggerated in my opinion. I think I feel like there's very few cases where fans tend to get inappropriate. Oh, you're muted.
Another question just popped up. Awesome presentation. Do you see the K-popification as being harmful to women, or do you think it's healthy for people to have a space for fangirling and such?
I think it's healthy for girls to have a space to fangirl. I Yeah, I don't think it's harmful for women at all. I think it's in some ways kind of, I wouldn't say an integral part of the girlhood experience, but I think it also I think makes space for like more women and like female fans to feel represented in their communities, and I think we should allow different ways to kind of perform fandom in these communities, because I think too with a lot of the esports community, a lot of the male fans come from traditional sports fandoms, and the female fans kind of come from, again, like K-pop, more traditionally feminine fandom, so they have very different ideas of what fandom is to them, so they can tend to clash, but I think there should be room for both.
See if anybody has another question to add. I'm not seeing any right now, but we do have a couple minutes left. So if there's anything else you want to share about this research or where you're planning to take it in the future, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'm planning to hopefully continue it with my master's thesis at BU. I'm not super sure what I'm going to do with that yet, but I'm hoping to do some more content analysis to kind of, I guess, analyze the way that female esports fans are kind of talked about within these communities. Just because I wanted to do content analysis along with the interviews, but I didn't have the time to. Um, but yeah, and then hopefully after that, try to get it published.
Excellent. Well, there's always the Esports Research Network conference next year to see the results of the content analysis. Any more questions? I believe we will move to our break. Thank you for your presentation, Sophie. Oh, wait, a
Oh,
question just popped up. What is your master's program at BU? What are you studying?
I'm in the emerging media studies department, and that kind of just deals with, new and upcoming media. So we talk a lot about AI, social media, games, that kind of stuff.
All right. Well, we will move to our break. We'll be back at 3:30 with our next presentation. Sophia, thank you again for sharing this research with us.
Thank you for having me.